Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our conversation with coaches. Today, we're going to talk about what can sometimes happen with Christians, people who believe in Jesus, and then we adopt, and our families get blown apart, and how that impacts our relationship with God. All of us have heard clients struggle with this. They bring it up at retreats, in groups, in our one-on-one coaching, but also we've all struggled with it as well. So we were just talking about this a little before we came on here, and one of the reasons I think this happens is because trauma really impacts our ability to discern what is true, what is false, what's right, what's wrong, what really happened. And the reason for that is because our kids with RAD have such a survival instinct that causes them to manipulate their circumstances and gaslight us, which means that they say it's purple when it's actually red, and we know it's red, but over time you start thinking, well, maybe it is purple because they're so convincing and all of that. So what about you guys? Did you experience that? The discernment, just feeling like you couldn't trust what you had always been able to trust anymore?
Yes, I think it all starts with what you just said, Carrie, like your inability to trust your own judgment because you're so manipulated for so long. You find yourself thinking, is it just me? Or you feel sort of like you're going crazy, like you're second guessing yourself because nobody else sees the child like you do. So then you're starting to question your own validity. And I think that translates later on to your inability to make any decisions. Like I didn't trust myself before in my own discernment. So just because the child's not in the home anymore, it doesn't mean that that's changed.
Right,
Yeah.
right. What about you, Amy?
Oh, my head's spinning. No, I mean, it definitely messed with my confidence in my decision making. Like, am I capable of making a good decision at this point? But oh my gosh, God, I mean, it touched my abandonment place. Super deep wound for me that I wasn't aware of. Like, I wasn't aware of that. And so they have their abandonment stuff. They're all in salvation, mode. And then I'm having this unawareness of mine. And it was everywhere. It was between them and me, the girls and me. It was between my husband and me. And then you see it now. I see it like, oh my gosh, it impacted my biological kids. And so you look to God and you're like, how are you letting this happen to all of us? How
Yeah.
did you let this happen to all of us? Is it all my fault? Like, what happened?
Well, and then the
So
anger, I think, comes out, which we've talked about before, that the anger is actually really a part of grief. And many times we don't even have the awareness that we're grieving. And so all of a sudden we're like these angry, like rage-filled, bitter, resentful people that we don't even recognize anymore. Like, who am I? How did this happen? And so we turn that to God and we're angry. I was telling Jen before you came on, Amy, that I remember one time I chucked my Bible across the room and left it there for like 2 or 3 weeks. And it was just splayed open, and I wouldn't look at it. And every time I'd walk by, I would just go, just leave me alone, because I was so angry. And so I took that as if God had done this to me, which, we don't have all the huge answers to all of this right now. We've certainly all had to work through this ourselves, and we work it through with our clients as well. And it's a process. It's not like you can figure this whole thing out in 5 minutes, but man, it
5 years maybe.
five, Yeah, maybe not 5 sessions even, but maybe. But, yeah, just being so angry. And then it kind of starts to, what it did for me, because by the way, when I went and looked at my Bible, guess where it was open? So there's this part at the end of Job after after his friends have blamed him and he's defending himself, and then he goes to God and wants to have an audience with God to like hash this out. And so then finally God speaks back, and the first thing he says is, tell me, if you would, where were you when I formed the foundations of the earth? Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? I'm not God and you are.
Wow.
But, oh,
Wow.
I know. And his grace and mercy are there in those moments, and you experience that, and that starts to draw you back in of like when you feel him drawing you back in that way, when you feel him speaking to you and you surrender to that, which is, at the end of the day, I always say, so who's the orphan?
Yeah.
I needed to be pursued and I needed to be rescued and I needed to be loved unconditionally. I needed to experience that.
mhm.
Yeah. And I think too, Amy, piggybacking on that is like, even if you don't even feel him pursuing you or drawing you back in, maybe you're just so angry that you don't feel anything from him. That's the place that I was in. I was so angry. I just didn't feel, my faith was so far off. I didn't feel him. I didn't even feel like, I felt like he looked away. So if you're feeling that, it's like, then where do you start?
Yeah, I know. That abandonment feeling is it's to your core.
Yep.
It's something from your childhood, or like it's just to your very being.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think
I
the thing,
remember,
oh,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Jen.
I just was going to say that the thing that I tried to remember was that he was always there. He had never left, and he was still pursuing me, even though I didn't feel it. There was a blockage in me, I felt like, and that didn't mean that he wasn't pursuing me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could tell myself that. I absolutely couldn't feel that. It wasn't until, and that's the reason I'm so passionate about our Names of God Bible study that I've run through a few times now, because that was really how my therapist gave me a study on one of the names of God. And that was how I saw him pursuing me.
Mm.
I had to show up, like you have to, again, it's that whole orphan thing of like, come out of the closet, come out of hiding, come into my presence and let's engage. And so everything that we wanted from our kids, we're acting this way with God. And so
I
when we come
so
out,
remember this, Amy. I remember, now we adopted in 2000, so this was before internet and before support groups and Facebook and all of this stuff. And I remember, so we were doing some holding therapy at that time, and I know people aren't doing that anymore, but at the time I was doing this, and I remember just the kicking and the screaming and the crying and the head butting and trying to get away and calling me all these names and everything. And I remember God like speaking gently to me, like, you do this too. Like, I'm just trying to hold you, and you're
yeah,
kicking and screaming and spitting in my face and telling me you hate me, and all of those kinds of things. And he's like, I'm just trying to love you, and you need to let me.
yes,
Oh, it's so painful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, like letting go of what we think God should be or what we think God should have done in our situation. I think that's where the anger starts to perpetuate itself. It's like, why doesn't this adoption look like everybody else's adoption on every street corner in America? Right.
Right.
And when you start to have that anger starting to stew, then you're resentful. Like, why didn't mine turn out the way I thought it would? Why aren't you giving
why aren't
me?
you being who I thought you were going to be? Yeah. And that's one of the things that's helped me to get out of that place is to ask a different question. So I want you to be my rescuer right now. Like, I want you to, I know you are a rescuer, the rescuer, and that's what I want. And when he's not rescuing, to be able to tell myself, okay, ask a different question. Who do you want to be for me right now? You don't want to be the rescuer for your good reason, your holy sovereign reason. Rescuing is not what I need from you. I need something else. So please show me what that is. Show me who you are for me in this. And he will, like, he will. And again, that's why I love the names of God, because I didn't know them all. I didn't even know who he was. Like,
Can
I
you give us
didn't
just
know.
like give us two or three of them just so people know what you're talking about?
Well, the first one that I did was from the story of Hagar. And so when he is the God who sees, and he calls him that, when so that was the most powerful one for me. I was just crying because God saw me. He saw me. And then we've done many of them now. We've been through a couple of different books, but that's just the one that's popping into my head right now. But the Lord will provide. Oh my goodness. one of our best witnesses to the Lord God the provider was for a person in the study they were being sued by the state, coming into a bunch of money to pay off the state. The week we were studying God, provider, God.
I remember that.
So he does. And, he just wants to be who he is. And he just wants us to rest and let him.
Well, and I think so many of us were, and this is not like a guilt or a shame or a blame thing, but like we're not taught that. We're not taught who he really is. And a lot of churches don't really teach us to read the Bible and don't encourage that. And he exposes and reveals who he is, and he wants us to know. But I'd never read the Bible until after all of this. And so that's when I really started getting to know who he actually is, not who I thought he was. And my thoughts of who he was disappointing me all over the place because I thought he was going to do this and I expected him to do this and to do it in this way and not to do it in that way. And so as I started getting to know him, like who he says he is and who his character is, because what I've learned is his character cannot change. It's not that his character doesn't change, but it can't change. So if he says something, he makes a promise, he can't go outside that. He has to follow through. Yeah. And that has made a huge difference for me. I know, Jen, you were saying before that when you were in the middle of all of this, you couldn't even pray at times. And I remember there was a season, I've shared this at the retreat that I do sometimes for parents as we're all trying to recover, that for a long time, like the only thing I could pray was, God, you promised abundant life and this isn't it. So like that was my whole prayer. It's so irreverent. It's so, but I have to say, I don't know when it shifted really. I can't point to a specific time, but I am living an abundant life. And he answered that prayer, even though I was snotty in how I asked him.
And even though your adoption went the way it went. And even though all these things,
in spite of, it doesn't matter. He still showed up and he still did what he was going to do. Did it happen when I thought? No. And in the way that I thought? No. Was it more painful than I ever could have imagined? Yes. And he's shown me, though, that he will get me through really, really hard things and that he will then take it and make something beautiful out of it and use it as a testimony to show other people going through really, really hard things. And now I'm not afraid to sit with people in their hard places. I mean, I know you guys aren't either. We talk to people every day who are suffering and going through really traumatic and difficult things. And it doesn't throw us off because we've been through it and God has walked us through.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think too, when you start to um, when you start to look at what is he teaching me through the trial, what could he possibly be teaching me? Then you start to look at it from a different perspective instead of what didn't I get?
Or
Well,
what's
when you're
wrong with
hurting,
me
you
that
just
what
don't,
did I do? Yeah.
Yes,
you don't even care when you're hurting. Like,
yes,
I don't want him to teach me anything. I just, like
yes,
you said, Amy, I want him to rescue me. I just need out. Help, help, help. And then he doesn't show up right then and in the way that you think. And so you're like, well, then he's not even, and that's not true. And sometimes it takes, a long time, a period of time, a season of time before we can look back and go, oh, okay,
mhm,
I see what he was doing there. And I
yeah,
see what really horrible things in me he needed
mhm,
to
yes,
um, firm
Work
up,
out.
change
And I
my
feel like that's a
character.
lot of attachment stuff too. It's just if we don't get what we want, then we pull away. We feel that that means you don't love me, you don't see me, you don't care about me. And isn't that, again, it's more of that attachment dynamic. And
mhm,
it's about our identity, it's about who we are. We are his children, and he does love us, and we don't walk in that. We don't feel that. We're not walking in that relationship. We're
mhm,
not experiencing that relationship. So that's what's being exposed. And he is showing us that he is our father and that he is with us. And we can trust him and we can rest.
Well, and over time, did you guys find that your discernment, as you healed up the trauma,
mhm,
as you dealt with the grief from the losses that you had, not just the loss of your child, but also the loss of the hopes and the dreams and, extended family and your place in the community and your church and all of the losses. Did you find that your discernment came back even stronger? Or was it the same, or are you still struggling?
I think at times I'm still struggling, but I think it's way better than it was. I think, but it's a very slow improvement
Well, and
because
Jan,
I
your relinquishment was just how long ago?
3 years.
Yeah. And Amy,
Yeah.
how long was yours?
I think we're 7 years out.
And I'm
Mhm,
like 12.
mhm,
So it's interesting,
mhm,
I feel like my discernment is so much better. I don't ever think like I hear God perfectly and I know what I'm doing. No, I am so humble these days,
Mm,
knowing how much I screwed it up and knowing how I can have a tendency to hear incorrectly and believe that I'm right when I'm really not. And
mhm.
so there's a humility, but also I felt like over time there was a I do remember this in particular. God was calling me to do something, and it was part of this ministry. And I was scared to death because I really wanted him to show me every single step. I just didn't trust myself to know how to do it. And so there was a time when I was like, okay, God, do you want me to do it like this or like this? And I'm sitting there like waiting on him for every little thing. And I wasn't moving. And finally, I just kind of sensed him saying, listen, I have taught you all of this and you know what to do. Now go do it. I was like, "Ah, I'm scared to do it." But that's when I started recognizing I do know his voice. He
yeah.
did teach me. He is my shepherd, and I do know his voice. And I
Mhm,
don't have to live in fear. It's like,
mhm,
especially when you're prayed up, God, give me your Holy Spirit, give me the discernment that I need to make this decision. And you've also confessed sins and you're humble and you're not just seeking your own way, but you really truly do want his way. And then you go to him, and then that nudge, and you're like,
mhm,
oh, there you are again.
yeah.
You didn't
Yeah.
Yeah.
leave me.
Mhm,
I feel like that's kind of where I am at now with just wrestling with my voice and its reach and um and trusting the Lord in that in overcoming that fear.
yeah.
So like I'm a decade behind you, but I'm coming.
And sometimes you're in front of me on other things too. So, it's not a race and we're all in this process, but I do think there is something about the process of time and the type of healing. And for those of you watching, if you're relating and you're like, well, how do you deal? What do you do about the discernment? How do you get the relationship back? How do you find that again? How do you deal with the anger? You know, that's what we do here. That truly is our ministry. Is all three of us coach people through Zoom, individually or couples, and we even do groups for your non-rad children that get overlooked. And we've got groups for moms, we've got Bible studies and just support groups. Some are Bible studies, some are support groups. We're getting our New Year list up and running here in the next couple of weeks. So if you go to our website at carryotoole.com and you don't see something that you're looking for, come back in a couple of weeks, or also just reach out and say, hey, I'd really like to be a part of something like this. Because sometimes when we get 8 or 10 people reaching out saying, hey, we'd really like a group, then we put one together when we know there are people ready to go. And the other thing is this retreat. We just did one in November, but we'll have another one in April. And we call it the relinquished retreat for parents, but you don't have to have relinquished a child. It's a combination of parents who are raising kids with reactive attachment disorder, or they've already raised them, or they're in a treatment facility, or they've been moved into a new home, or you're considering, or any of those situations. You know, we work with you. It's not about your child. It's about you, your spouse, and how to recover from all that you have lost during this time. So you guys want to add anything else here before we close?
No, that's good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having this chat with me. I just was thinking about it this morning, and it's like, I know this has been such an issue for me. It was a struggle for a long time. I know you guys have struggled with it, and I know our clients are as well. So we hope that you feel like you're not alone in this, and that this gave you a little bit of hope moving forward. So until next time, thanks for joining us.